What is justice? Not the word carved into the back of a coat, not the doctrine they hand you at orientation. What is justice? When the man who carries it has never once been allowed to question where it came from. Right now, across every sea of this world, someone is pulling on a white marine coat because at some point, in some burning village, in some harbor turned to ash, they watched a pirate destroy something precious and they swore they would never let that happen again. These people are good, hold on to that. Because the real tragedy of One Piece is not evil men doing evil things. The tragedy is good people, genuinely, originally, irreducibly good people, doing monstrous things in the name of something they were never allowed to question. Today we're talking about the Marines, and by the time this video ends, I want you to understand one thing. They are not the villains of this story, they are its most tragic heroes. And in the final war, they will turn their blades against the very god they were built to serve. Before we talk about the fall, we have to talk about what they were before they fell. The Marines exist because people needed them to exist. Ask the civilians of Kokoyashi village what Arlong's unchecked rule felt like. Ask any nameless island in East Blue what happens when no one comes when you call for help. The threat that the Marines were built to address is real, and the people who answered that call joined for real reasons. Koby is not an accident in this story. He is a thesis statement wearing a Marine uniform. His dream, stated plainly in the very first arc, is not glory or rank, it is to protect people. Oda put him on page 1 so we'd never forget what the Marines were supposed to be. Then there's Garp, the Marine hero, a man who cornered Gold Roger twice, refused Fleet Admiral because he hated the politics, and raised both Luffy and Ace in full knowledge of who they were. Garp is the beating, broken heart of the institution, a man who knows the world government is rotten, despises the celestial dragons, and stays anyway. Not because he's blind, because the Marines are not just his career, they are his faith. Garp is not a hypocrite. Garp is a tragedy. The thread between Koby, Garp, and the thousands of Marines like them is not obedience. It is love. Love for ordinary people. Love for the idea that the weak deserve protection. That love is real, and it is exactly that love that will eventually break the chains. But here is where Oda pulls back the curtain on something deeply unsettling. Stay with me, because this is where it gets dark. Absolute justice. 2 words. A doctrine. A cage. Absolute justice holds that the ends always justify the means. That collateral damage in the name of order is not just acceptable, it is righteous. It sounds extreme said plainly, but the genius of how Oda constructs it is that it was never presented to Marine recruits that way. It came wrapped in the language of sacrifice, of hard choices that weak men cannot make, true enough to be believable, false enough to be lethal. No event illustrates this more devastatingly than Ohara. A group of scholars on a small island were doing the most dangerous thing imaginable, reading, researching the void century, the erased century the world government needed the world to forget. The response was a Buster Call, 5 battleships, complete destruction, men, women, children, burned in the name of absolute justice. And the Marines who pulled those triggers were not monsters, they were soldiers following protocol, given a narrative that made their action feel necessary. But Vice Admiral Sol saw it clearly. He broke, he turned, he died standing between a fleet of warships and a little girl named Robin, telling her to keep living because one day the world would understand what had been done here. Sol's defection is not an anomaly, it is a prophecy. Because the story of One Piece is full of Marines whose goodness keeps cracking through the conditioning. Smoker in Alabasta lets Luffy escape and files a false report because actual justice mattered more than doctrine. Fujitora in Dressrosa publicly broadcasts that the Straw Hats saved the kingdom directly against government orders using the rules against the rulers. And Aokiji, who found Robin as an adult fully within his power to eliminate her, and walked away, because somewhere beneath the admiral title was still the person who had once looked at a lonely little girl and felt something human. These moments are not plot convenience. They are Oda showing us systematically that absolute justice never fully takes. The goodness that made these people pick up a coat in the first place, it never dies. It only gets buried, and buried things eventually come back up. What Oda has been building for 1,000 chapters is about to erupt, and when it does, nothing will be the same. To understand why the Marines will turn against the world government, you need to understand how Oda plants seeds decades before they bloom. Sword is the institutional expression of everything we've been discussing. A unit of Marines who officially resigned, on paper they don't exist, specifically so they can operate without being bound by world government policy. They found a legal loophole to remain Marine in spirit while cutting the doctrine loose. Koby is Sword. The most morally pure Marine in the story is the center of this shadow unit. That is not coincidence. That is architecture. Then there is Vegapunk's broadcast, perhaps the most significant event in recent chapters. The greatest mind in the world in his final moments spoke directly to every person alive. The world will sink, the world government knows it, and you are not being protected, you are being managed. Imagine being a Marine recruit from East Blue, someone who joined to protect their home, and hearing that. Imagine being T-Bone, who spent his career repairing bridges for farmers, and hearing that the institution he gave his life to has been sitting on a global catastrophe while treating populations like livestock. The broadcast did not just inform, it fractured, and the void century will finish the job. When the truth the world government erased for 800 years floods back into the light, it will be a direct indictment of everything they claim to stand for. The Marines were not built to protect the world government. They were built to protect people, and the moment they understand those two things are opposites, absolute justice collapses. Not every Marine will turn. Akainu cannot. To turn would mean facing the full horror of what he has done, including killing Ace. That weight would unmake him, but Koby will turn. Fujitora has already turned in his heart. Smoker's moral compass has always pointed at truth. And the thousands of ordinary Marines, they will look at Imu on the empty throne and make the only choice their original goodness ever prepared them to make. They will stand with the people. The final war will not be pirates versus Marines. It will be the moment an institution's conscience finally catches up with its actions. And Luffy, who has never converted anyone through argument, only through the sheer force of being free, will be the catalyst. Every person who has ever followed him remembered something they had buried, the original version of themselves before the world taught them to shrink. Justice is not a doctrine. It is not a flag, a coat, or a word printed on someone's back. Justice is the moment a vice admiral drops his weapon and stands between a fleet of warships and a little girl. Justice is the moment a captain files a false report because the truth would have destroyed something beautiful. Justice is the moment a blind admiral lets the world know who actually saved them, regardless of what the government ordered. The Marines were told that this kind of justice is weakness, that mercy is a liability, that the individual does not matter when the system is at stake. Luffy has been proving since chapter 1 that the system does not matter when the individual is at stake. There is a scene I keep returning to, Marineford. Chaos everywhere, and Koby, shaking, terrified, stands up in the middle of the greatest war in modern history and shouts that it needs to stop, that these soldiers deserve to live. Shanks looks at this trembling boy and tells him that in that one moment he accumulated the weight of hundreds of lives. One Marine, shaking, saying stop. That is the Marines of One Piece, buried under centuries of doctrine, beneath the institutional weight of an organization built to serve power, but still breathing, still looking for the moment to say, this is not who we are, this is not what we were for. When the void century surfaces and Imu's throne is exposed for what it is, the Marines will remember Koby, they will remember Garp, they will remember every moment their conscience broke through, and they will fight for the world, not the government that claimed to own it, because that was always the promise. Not justice that destroys everything in its path, justice that protects what is worth saving.